Hey, and welcome to Synaptic Soul, the podcast where science meets spirit, and we get real about the beautiful and brutal and magical mess of being human. I'm your host, Ava Marie Anderson, writer, mystic, multidimensional mischief maker. Quick disclaimer, you may hear the occasional snort, sigh, dramatic flop from my two French bulldogs, Rocky and Rambo. They're the soundtracks of my life, my soul companions, and honestly, the real stars of the show. Someday we'll dedicate a full episode to their role in my daily rituals, emotional healing, and wild spiritual life. But for now, just know that they're always close by, snoring their support. Let's dive in. So let's begin with something bold and biologically true. Human beings are not wired for facts. We're wired for story. The brain doesn't perk up when you give it a list of data points. It perks up when you say, "Girl, let me tell you what happened." And then suddenly the whole system leans in. Your neurons start buzzing. Your breath shifts. Your emotional body goes on high alert, ready to feel what's coming next. Because somewhere deep in our DNA, we remember that stories are survival. Your brain, yes, even yours on a Monday before coffee, is a pattern seeking machine. It's not interested in raw emotion and information unless it has something to do with it. But the moment you wrap information in a narrative, it gets sticky. The moment that you add a beginning, a middle, and an end, boom, hippocampus lights up. The amygdala gets involved. The motor cortex and visual cortex show up to the party. Story literally turns of your brain than just about anything else. And it's not just about lighting up the brain regions like some sort of psychedelic neuroscience Christmas tree. It's about the type of engagement that happens. So let's talk mirror neurons, the MVPs of empathy. When you hear someone describe a visceral experience, your brain doesn't just understand it, it feels it. If I say, "I stepped barefoot on a hot sidewalk and yelped like a banshee," there is a good chance that your toes curled in sympathetic pain. And it's not your imagination. That's your neurons simulating the experience inside of your body. It's the biological echo of my story becoming your sensation. And this, my love, is why we are so affected by books and films and podcasts and even a good TikTok monologue. When we see someone crack open emotionally, when we hear the tremble in their voice or the glint of rage in their eye, we feel it. We're not just hearing about their heartbreak, we're mirroring it. Our brains, in all their brilliant messiness, are designed to merge for a moment. And that's the foundation of storytelling's power. It's resonance. And now, here is where the magic gets molecular. When a story hits us right in the feels, our brains release oxytocin, which is a neurochemical associated with bonding and trust and love. And yeah, it is the same chemical released during orgasm and childbirth and deep eye gazing with somebody that you can't decide if you love or want to strangle. That's oxytocin, and it flows generously when we hear emotionally authentic stories. So, storytelling is not just a cognitive exercise, it is a full body neurochemical experience. This is the same mechanism that allowed our ancestors to survive by passing on wisdom. "Don't eat the red berries near the cliff" turns into, "Let me tell you what happened to cousin Mako when he got curious with the red berries." Like, boom, you are now invested. And now you remember. And then here's the kicker: neuroplasticity. Every time you tell your story, especially if you've never told it before or if you tell it in a new way, you're creating new neural pathways. You're not just recounting an event, you're reshaping the map in your mind. And you're building new meaning around something old. You're literally evolving. This is why therapy works, why journaling is a spiritual act, and why sometimes crying in the shower while narrating your own drama out loud is actually healing. You're not just releasing emotion, you're rewriting your neural architecture. And when you do it consciously and with an intention, that's when it becomes alchemy. Now, let's talk about the stories we don't tell. And you know which ones. They're the ones that you've edited to sound more socially acceptable, or the ones that you skipped over to keep people comfortable, or the ones that you buried so deep even you forgot the real version. And those stories are still alive inside of you, and they're hungry. They are locked doors in your nervous system. And every time you tell a sanitized version to survive, every time you smile and say, it wasn't that bad, when actually it shattered something inside of you, you are reinforcing the neural pathway of silence and shame and self abandonment. But the moment you tell the truth, not the performance, not the branding friendly version, but the raw and unfiltered soul rattling truth, you shift your biology. You reclaim space in your own system, and you basically reintroduce yourself to your cells. Here's where it gets a little metaphysical. Your body's listening, always, and your voice is a tuning fork. When you speak your story with awareness, you're sending a vibrational signal into your cells that says, this is safe now. We're not hiding anymore. And then that message ripples through your fascia and your nervous system and your subconscious and your electromagnetic field. You become less fragmented, more whole. You come back online. And listen, I get it. Telling the truth isn't always glamorous. Sometimes it's ugly crying into a cracked phone screen. Sometimes it's stammering through your words because your throat chakra's been on mute since the fourth grade. Sometimes it's rage. Sometimes it's grief. And sometimes it's just awkward as hell. But all of that, it's sacred and it's real and it's where the magic lives. We live in a world that rewards performance, packaging, and palatability. So when you show up with your unpolished, sacred mess of a story, you're doing something radical. You are resisting the cultural demand to be digestible, and you're embodying the medicine that only you can carry. Now, let's be clear. It's not about being loud. You don't have to spill your guts on social media to be powerful. Telling your story might mean writing it in your journal, or speaking it to a trusted friend, or whispering it to yourself under the covers. It might mean dancing it out, or painting it, or screaming it into the ocean, which is all valid and all holy. But here's what I want you to remember. Your story isn't just yours. It's a transmission. It's a spell, a frequency, a ripple in the collective field. When you tell the truth about what you've lived, you're not just healing your own system. You're creating resonance for others to do the same. Have you ever heard someone speak their truth and you felt your whole body go, yes? That's not coincidence. That's entrainment. That's your nervous system recognizing its reflection in another. So if you're ever wondering if your story is worth telling, it is. If you're wondering if you're healed enough to share it, you are. And if you're waiting for permission, here it is. And this is just the beginning. So let's take a breath. Let's rewind. Let's remember what we know in our bones. Before apps and microphones and algorithmic validation, there was the fire, there was the circle, there was the drumbeat of heart and earth and story vibrating through soil and skin and soul. And our ancestors, they knew that storytelling wasn't an optical artistic outlet. It was the core operating system of being human. Every culture on this planet, before colonialization scrambled it all up, had some form of sacred storytelling tradition. And it wasn't entertainment. It wasn't monetized. It wasn't a content strategy. It was ceremony, and it was survival, and it was remembering. So let's talk about the griots of West Africa, these lineage holders whose job it was to keep oral history alive across generations. These weren't side characters. These were living libraries. You didn't make a political decision without consulting the griot. You didn't bury your dead or crown your chief or plant your crops without invoking the stories. In Indigenous Australia, the Dreamtime stories are not just a myth, they're maps. They encode the spiritual laws of the land. They tell of ancestral beings and geography and hunting and relationships. And they're not told in one sitting, they're lived across a lifetime. In Ireland, Brigid wasn't just the goddess of poetry. She was the poetry, the forge and the flame and the healer and the midwife. When the stories of Brigid were passed down, they carried so much more than metaphor. They carried initiation codes. They reminded people of their place in the world and their responsibility to it and to their birthright magic. In Sumerian myth, Inanna's descent into the underworld wasn't just a juicy tale about a goddess's glowdown. It was a ritual roadmap. It said, you will lose everything. You will strip down to your bare soul, and you'll rise again, but different. That's not just mythology. It's a trauma healing template. And then in Egypt, Isis and Osiris weren't just romantic figures. They were the cosmic mechanics. Isis gathers the scattered pieces of Osiris to resurrect him, not because she's codependent, but because rebirth requires honoring the broken parts. That myth teaches us how to grieve and how to alchemize. So do you see the pattern? Our ancestors weren't telling stories to kill time. They were transmitting survival codes and spiritual teachings and emotional fluency and cosmological frameworks through metaphor and through myth. These stories changed as needed, but the function never did. Story was the original healing modality, and it didn't require degrees or branding. All it required was presence and maybe a willingness to be in relationship with the land and the people and the unseen. Now let's talk about the fire. The fire was more than warmth. It was the original sacred technology. When people sat around it, they didn't just share stories. They regenerated. Nervous systems relaxed. Laughter synced breath. Grief was metabolized communally. Witnessing was built in. You didn't need to pay for a therapist because you had the circle. And the circle had rules. When you spoke, you were heard. No one interrupted you. No one jumped in with advice. The circle knew how to hold space because it was the space. And now, contrast that with today. You post your truth on Instagram and instantly brace yourself for judgment, trolling, or worse. Crickets, silence. The void of the algorithm, or the slow death of being misunderstood. But in the old way, you didn't have to be viral. You didn't have to be articulate. You just had to be honest. And then came the break. Colonialism didn't just steal the land. It stole the story. It replaced oral traditions with written text and then elevated certain texts as truth and deemed everything else as superstition. Entire cultures were gaslit. The griots became uneducated, the medicine women became dangerous, and the wisdom keepers became targets. You want to talk about collective trauma? That's it. When the channel between the past and the present is broken, the soul gets disoriented. When the story is interrupted, the people forget who they are. And when capitalism entered the chat, things got even more insidious. Now story wasn't sacred, it was a commodity. Sell your story, monetize your pain, perform your vulnerability. Story became branding. Relatability became currency, and somewhere in there, the sacred thread got tangled. But yet here we are, still telling, still whispering, still circling, even if the circle is now a Zoom grid or a podcast feed or a late night voice note between soul sisters. Because something in us remembers. Something in our DNA still glows when someone says, once upon a time, or there's something I've never told anyone, or my favorite. This might sound crazy, but our blood hums and our breath stills and our hearts lean in. Because story isn't just what happened, it's how we make meaning. It's how we metabolize our existence. It's how we offer the oracle of our life to the collective pot and say, here's what I learned in the fire. And maybe that's why storytelling feels so intimate, because it's not just about expression, it's about belonging. When someone truly listens to your story without trying to fix it or minimize it or spin it into something digestible, you feel real and seen and validated and rooted. That's ancestral. It's memory and it's medicine. So, how do we reclaim this for the modern life? Well, maybe start by honoring the fire, in whatever form it takes for you. Maybe it's a weekly story circle with friends. Maybe it's starting your own podcast. Maybe it's writing to your ancestors in a journal. Or maybe it's simply learning to speak without apologizing, to share without softening the edges for somebody else's comfort. And remember, you don't owe anyone your most painful stories, but you do owe yourself the truth, the real truth, the messy truth, the sacred truth, the truth that lives under the story you've been telling just to survive. Because that deeper story, that's the one that ancestors are waiting for. You're the continuation of an oral tradition older than empire, older than patriarchy, and older than prince. You're the flame keeper, a story midwife, a myth in motion. And when you speak, when you really speak, you wake something up, not just in you, but in the field, in the lineages, in the listeners. Your story is not decoration, it's invocation, it's initiation, and it's the bridge. And you are the voice that was never meant to be silenced. This episode is brought to you in part by one of my most favorite humans on this spinning planet, Morgan Garza, and her book Soul Magic. If you've ever felt like your power was just waiting beneath the surface, or like there's something ancient and electric inside of you ready to be reclaimed, then this is the book that helps you remember. Soul Magic is not just a read, it is a summoning. It's filled with rituals and stories and the kind of grounded spiritual wisdom that doesn't talk at you, it talks with you. Morgan writes like a soul sister, a cosmic cheerleader, and a priestess all rolled into one. And it's a must-have for anyone on the path of awakening, reclaiming. So grab your copy at morgangarza.com or wherever books are sold, or bless someone else's journey and gift it. Because real magic's meant to be shared. That's Soul Magic by Morgan Garza. You'll feel it in your bones. So let's be honest. If our ancestors had it right, and they did, then where in the heck did we go wrong? Somewhere along the spiraling timeline of human history, we stopped gathering around the fires and started gathering around fluorescent lights and Outlook calendars. We traded stories for status updates and wisdom for SEO rankings and community for convenience. Welcome to Disconnection Nation, population all of us, frantically Googling how to feel less alone at 2 a.m. It didn't happen all at once. It happened slowly and subtly, like erosion. First came the break from the land, the enclosure of common spaces, the privatization of what used to be shared. Then came the Industrial Revolution, which sure gave us technological advancements and longer life expectancy, but also factory bells and child labor and the very first case of burnout. And then suddenly, people who once lived and worked communally were now confined to wage labor and commuting away from their families and living in cities that never slept. And what was one of the first things that we gave up? Story circles, communal meals, song and ritual and slowness and witnessing. Enter loneliness, depression, and a sneaky epidemic of not being seen. So then fast forward to modern capitalism, where everything became a product, including your identity. Authenticity was repackaged as personal branding. Storytelling got swept into the realm of content creation. And if you couldn't monetize it, well, was it even worth telling? Let's talk about the patriarchy for a sec, because you know he's lurking behind the curtain. Patriarchy didn't just silence the stories of women and queer folk and indigenous people and basically anybody not aligned with dominant culture. It taught us to internalize the idea that silence equals safety, that performance equals survival, that your story needs to be trimmed and filtered and softened or completely buried to make it in this world. And the result, millions of people walking around with brilliant, sacred stories burning inside them like a wildfire with no outlet and no circle, no safety to share. So, what do? We scroll, we post, we go live on TikTok to cry about our breakup while 10,000 strangers hit the heart button and whisper, same. And that, my friend, is where things get complicated. Because just when you think storytelling has been lost in the digital noise, just when you're about to give up on finding any meaning in your For You page, something hits you in the gut. A stranger tells their truth, and then suddenly your eyes are full of tears. They said the thing that you have never been able to say. They named it. And now you feel a little less alone. And that's the paradox of the digital age. We are more isolated than ever and more connected than ever. We lost the fire and then rebuilt it in pixels. We no longer sit in village circles, but we sit in comment threads. We wear noise canceling headphones while tuning into voices that say you're not the only one. And listen, I am not here to romanticize the internet. Social media is a wild beast. It is addictive, it's performative, it rewards the shiny and punishes the slow. It monetizes your trauma and encourages oversharing and tricks you into measuring your worth in likes and follows. It gives you dopamine hits instead of deep intimacy. And it's the fire and the fire hazard. But it also gave us digital medicine. It gave us Black TikTok creators reclaiming ancestral dances and cultural memory. It gave us indigenous elders teaching language preservation. It gave us women sharing birth stories and trans people narrating transitions and autistic folks creating sensory-friendly, safe spaces, witches deconstructing the witch wound, and neurodivergent content creators reframing what it means to live and love and thrive in this system. It gave us each other again, and not in the traditional way, not with eye contact and shared meals and hands on hearts in the moonlight, but in the best way that we could figure out while surviving modern capitalism, collective trauma, and basically spiritual burnout. But here's where it gets juicy. This digital storytelling is somatic and it's real. And so when you hear a podcast that tells the story of someone healing from something that you thought was only yours to carry, your nervous system responds, and your breath shifts, and your cortisol lowers, and you remember, I'm not alone. Because, it's never just the story. It's the resonance of being witnessed. And that's what we're all so desperately craving. Not likes, not virality, not, even fame, really. We're craving witnessing. We're craving the ache of being known and the medicine of me too, and the collective sigh of, oh, it wasn't just me. The exhale that only comes when your nervous system finally feels safe enough to stop performing and just be. And that's what the storytelling gives us, even through a screen. It gives us our tether back to humanity, a trail of breadcrumbs to follow back home. But we have to be careful because the algorithm is hungry and it'll consume every vulnerable piece of you if you let it. So here's the invitation: don't just perform your story, own it, reclaim it. Tell it with your whole chest and not your carefully created persona. Tell it as ritual, as an offering, as an act of spiritual resistance against the pressure to be anyone other than who you are. And then tell it in ways that feel nurturing. You don't owe the internet your entire trauma archive, but what you do owe yourself is the gift of authentic expression, even if your only audience is your ancestors. Because let's not forget, they're watching and they're cheering and they're weeping when you finally say the thing they were never allowed to. They're rejoicing when you break the silence they had to swallow. That when you speak, you complete something, you close a loop, and you're free more than just yourself. You free them too. And so maybe the fire is here after all, and maybe it never left. Maybe it's in your AirPods, in your voice memos, in your Instagram stories, in your podcast downloads, in your journal entries, in your unposted rants. Maybe that fire now glows in little blue dots that say typing across a screen. Maybe it's not gone. Maybe it just changed form. And maybe, just maybe, the algorithm doesn't stand a chance against the frequency of your truth. So speak it, reclaim it, and when you do, watch what lights up, not just in you, but in everyone that hears you and thinks, finally, somebody said it. Okay, love, buckle in. It's time to take this conversation straight into the quantum field because storytelling isn't just therapeutic, it's dimensional. It's not only about biology or emotion, it's about energy and vibration and timeline shifts and multiversal mechanics, all wrapped up in the sound of your own voice. You see, every story that you tell emits a frequency. And that frequency doesn't just bounce off walls, it travels and it lingers and it weaves itself into the fabric of your reality. Why? Because in quantum physics, nothing is fixed. Everything is vibrating. Everything is potential. And you're a walking, talking vibration emitter. And you're not just telling stories, you're coding timelines. So let's start with a foundational quantum principle, the observer effect. This is the phenomenon where the act of observation influences the outcome of an event. So a subatomic particle behaves differently depending on whether or not it's being observed. And in simpler terms, it just means that your intention has power. Where you place your awareness, your energy flows. And where your energy flows, matter organizes. Reality responds to how you see it. And so, let's now apply that to storytelling. When you tell a story from the lens of empowerment, even if the story begins in trauma, the vibration that you're emitting is sovereignty. If you tell that same story from the vibration of shame, the field matches that. It's not about faking positivity. It's about choosing the frequency you're anchoring as truth. And this is why two people can live through similar events but tell completely different stories, and then manifest radically different lives. One says, I was abandoned and I'll never trust again. Another says, I was abandoned and it taught me to choose myself. So, same facts, just different frequency, different future. Your story is not just what happened, it's how you hold what happened. And this means storytelling is one of the most powerful quantum tools that we have for timeline jumping. When you tell a new version of your story, not by erasing the pain, but by integrating it with meaning, you literally collapse one set of quantum probabilities and open another. You're not just venting, you're collapsing wave functions. You're stepping into the version of reality where you are free and whole and embodied and wise and no longer bound by that old frequency loop. So let me ask, whose voices are you using when you tell your stories? Is it your voice today? Is it your voice at 7 years old? Your voice filtered through somebody else's expectations? Maybe through your trauma? Through your need to be liked? So pause for that. Because if the frequency of your story is still being narrated by your wounded self, it's okay. But know that it's anchoring you into that timeline. And you get to choose another. All right. Now let's talk non-linearity. In the quantum model, time isn't a straight line. It's stacked, spiraled, simultaneous. And that means that your past isn't just over and done, it's still happening in a parallel layer of reality. And when you re-narrate a story, you're not just healing your present, you're sending ripples into the past. You're changing how that memory is held in your energetic field. You're sending love to your former self and telling them, we made it out, we're okay, and here's what we learned. And then that changes everything. That's why your inner child work is so potent. Why guided journeys into past versions of you can be so transformative. You're not time traveling, you're frequency aligning. You're syncing up your current vibration with the wisdom that version of you never had access to. So let's talk about voice for a second. Not metaphorically, but literally. Your vocal cords are vibrating tissue. Your words carry frequency. Every syllable carries intent. Sound moves matter. It's called somatics. Look it up. Sound creates shape. And what are your stories if not long form spells casting vibrational blueprints into the field? Think of every time you said, I always mess things up, or nothing good ever lasts, or I'm just not meant to be seen. You aren't just sharing feelings, you're broadcasting. You're casting spells, repeating old programs, and looping old realities. But the second you become aware of that loop, you can break it. You can shift the narrative from, this is just how I am, to, this is the story I've been telling, but not the one that I'm choosing anymore. And that's quantum agency. That's reality creation. That's when the storytelling becomes alchemy. And don't forget, frequency is contagious, dude. You can ever notice how someone's vulnerability cracks you wide open? Or how a public story of healing stirs something ancient inside of you? That's entrainment. It's quantum resonance. When one vibration hits another and then syncs up. So when you speak your truth with clarity and presence, you're not just healing yourself, you are sending out a harmonic that allows others to meet you there. And then the field changes, and the room shifts, and the ripple goes out. You become a tuning fork for coherence. And that's why not every story has to be told with words. Some are told through presence, through art, through movement, through the energy that you carry when you walk into a room, no longer hiding what once haunted you. You embody the new story. And that's the highest frequency there is. You stop telling the story and start being the transmission. That's where storytelling becomes transcendent. It's not just narrative, it's vibration. It's the unseen ripple of your frequency aligning with the truth of who you are becoming. So if you take nothing else from this episode, take this. You are always broadcasting. Every thought, every belief, every story you carry is radiating out into the field. You don't need to be perfect. You don't need to have it all figured out. You just need to be intentional. Choose your story like it matters because it does. Choose it like it changes things because it will. And when you tell it next, tell it like a spell. Speak it like the timeline you want to live in. Tell it from your healed self, even if your current self still doubts it. Because that's the quantum leap. That's the spark. And listen to me, you have had it all along. This episode is supported in part by Sage App, aka the app that's basically a metaphysical multivitamin. It's like having a spiritual sanctuary in your pocket, minus the incense smoke in your purse. It's also where I host my new moon manifestation clubs, which, if you know, we go deep. So if you're ready to stop doom scrolling and start soul scrolling, download Sage in the App Store or Google Play and then step into a more intentional, magical version of your day. That's SAGED, like Sage, but with an app. Back to the episode. So welcome to the age of energy and rebellion and deep soul remembering. We are in the age of Aquarius. And this isn't just an astrological vibe shift. It is a full-blown resonance of voice, of truth, of weird and wild and unapologetic expression. And the most revolutionary thing that you can do in this age is tell your story out loud, on purpose, and with magic. See, Aquarius is ruled by Uranus, the planet of disruption and innovation and electricity. This is the age that doesn't want your polish. It just wants your frequency. It wants the messy and the mystical and the moment when your voice cracks and your heart opens and something ancient and alive pours through. In this age, your voice is your technology. It's not about speaking loudly. It's about speaking real. Because your story, when told with intention, becomes a vibrational key. And when you speak your truth, you're not just expressing, you are casting a spell. And that spell is not only for you, it ripples through the collective field. It reaches into your bloodline, healing the mouths that stayed shut for survival. It speaks across dimensions to ancestors who could not. It echoes forward into timelines not yet lived, preparing a softer path for those that come next. And let's pause here for a second, because I know the resistance is real. Maybe you've been silenced before. Maybe you were told to be quiet or not take up space, to make it pretty, or to not say it at all. Maybe you tried to speak and no one listened. Or maybe your voice shakes every time you open your mouth. It's not weakness. That's memory. That's a nervous system remembering past shutdowns and trying to protect you. But in the age of Aquarius, your voice is liberation. You don't have to shout. You don't have to make a podcast or write a book or stand on a stage unless you want to. Reclaiming your voice can look like writing letters to your younger self. It can look like finally telling a friend what really happened that night. It can look like singing in the car when you used to keep it quiet. It can look like standing in the mirror and saying, "This is who I am and I'm not hiding anymore." It is that simple and that holy. Because here's the thing in the Aquarian era. Community is coming back, but not in the old way. Not in the tribal, we all have to be the same kind of way, but in the soul constellation kind of way. Digital covens, online temples, group chats that feel more sacred than a Sunday Mass. People are finding their people through resonance, and that resonance begins with story. When you tell your truth, not the filtered performance-ready truth, but the raw and trembling soul truth, you send out a signal. And that signal attracts your people and your timeline and your next expansion. Your voice becomes that tuning fork, that lighthouse in a spell. And now let's talk about what that spell can look like in real life. Maybe you sit with a notebook and you write out your old story, the one that's been keeping you stuck. And then you rewrite it from your future self, the version of you that's already lived through it, who found the gold in the rubble, and that's spell work. Maybe you speak your story into a voice memo every morning. Or maybe you light a candle, call in your ancestors, and tell the truth that you've been avoiding. That's spell work. Maybe you speak your dreams aloud, even if you don't know how they'll happen. Or maybe you tell the story of your future as if it's already written. Maybe you look in the mirror and say, I'm no longer who I used to be. That's the real spell work. Because the words that you speak hold intention, and intention shapes the quantum field. And here's something beautiful. The more you tell your story, the more it evolves. That story you used to tell from a place of pain, it starts to become the one of power. And not because the pain disappears, but because you've metabolized it. You made meaning. You've spun thread from the shadow and created a tapestry that nobody else could ever weave. And that's your legacy. This is your offering. And the world needs it. Not a perfected version of you, not a Pinterest-ready, algorithm-approved version of you, but the real you, the one who's still figuring it out, the one who's scared but speaks anyway, the one who turns trauma into art and confusion into connection and silence into spell. Because when we do that, when we start telling the real stories again, we heal so much more than just ourselves. We heal the field, we rewrite the culture, and we remember what it means to be human together. So as we close this episode, I want you to ask yourself, what story have I been afraid to tell? And whose voice is missing from the narrative that I've been living? And what would happen if I let my truth be louder than my fear? You don't have to answer perfectly, you just have to begin. So start with a whisper, with a journal, with a reel, with a voice note, with a poem, with a prayer. Just speak your spell. And know that every time you do, you bring us all a little closer to the truth. And this is what it means to be in the Aquarian age. This is what it means to be sovereign and soft and fierce and human and holy. This is what it means to light the fire again with your own voice as the spark. I'll meet you there. Until then, keep telling the truth. Keep tuning into your frequency. And keep trusting that your story is not a detour. It's literally the path. If you loved this episode, be sure to hit that subscribe button and leave us a glowing review. It helps more beautiful souls like you find this space. Because your words matter, your energy ripples, and every review is like a little spell of support for the Synaptic Soul mission. So until next time, stay curious, stay cosmic, and keep waking the F up.